it's a clown show. It's a clown show, with hostages. And the way that the press coverage has been, both sided on this is absolutely depressing as hell to me.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 8 of the Aaron Rupar Show. Today, I am talking with Dan Froomkin, the founder of Press Watch. Dan has, for many, many years now, done great accountability work, primarily focused at the written political press, the New York Times and the Washington Post, Politico, outlets like that. And I really appreciate his expertise and the work he does holding those outlets accountable, because obviously a big focus of my work is right-wing media. I cover a lot of Fox News and Newsmax, OAN, Trump World, things like that. And Dan, I think, provides a really interesting supplement, an important supplement to what I do and what other people like me do at Press Watch, where he focuses a lot on the elite print outlets and ways in which they're falling short and occasionally doing a good job. But, accountability, media criticism often focuses on things that outlets like that can do better. So Dan and I talk about the unique challenges presented by Trump, going back to 2016 and continuing to the present day, how he thinks coverage of Trump's third campaign is going so far, the problem with fact-checking, especially in this era of Trump and weaponized lying that Republicans like to do, how coverage of the Trump-DeSantis horse race kind of misses the bigger picture of the fact that these two very flawed and dangerous candidates are the frontrunners to begin with, the elite press's addiction to negative coverage of President Biden, and a whole lot more. Next week on the podcast, I will be talking with Oliver Willis, another legend of online progressive journalism. And so I'm really looking forward to talking with Oliver. And like this episode, that episode next week will drop late Wednesday. So if you haven't already, please subscribe to the Aaron Rupar Show wherever you get your podcasts. And if you are more of a video podcast person, obviously I post the footage of all of these interviews that I do on my YouTube page. So please subscribe there if you haven't, and leave positive reviews wherever you can. And please share the show if you enjoy it and other people in your life who are into progressive media, into politics. Please spread the word, because I am looking to grow the show as much as I can. So without further ado, let's get to my interview with Dan. Well, welcome everyone to the Aaron Rupar Show. I'm thrilled today to have Dan Froomkin on with me. Dan is the founder of Press Watch, which does really good accountability work about the mainstream press. And one of the things I find particularly valuable about Press Watch is that, I think sometimes right-wing media, it's important to do accountability work about the Fox Newses and Newsmaxes of the world, but it can kind of feel like low-hanging fruit sometimes. And I think the work that Dan does, holding outlets like the New York Times and Washington Post, other outlets of that ilk, the elite ones accountable, is a little bit more difficult to do, but also very important, because sometimes their failings can be a little more subtle than the propaganda you might see on Fox. So Dan, welcome. Thanks for joining me today.
Oh, thanks. It's great to be here. And I consider you a national treasure.
Gee. I think it's the first time anybody's ever said that to me. So that's high praise. I really appreciate that, because you're kind of an OG in this space of doing accountability work. And I think I actually mentioned we did a Q&A with Dan for Public Notice, my newsletter, back in December. And I mentioned writing the top of that I feel like you are kind of the successor to the Eric Boehlert legacy of doing, kind of hard-hitting mainstream media accountability work. So, from my standpoint, that's high praise, because I really enjoyed Eric's work. Yeah. And you've kind of picked up the baton from him in that area. So you obviously have spent a lot of time, at the Washington Post before founding Press Watch, and a lot of the work that you do, a lot of us writing and talking about politics these days, it has a lot to do with Trump, obviously, because Trump, presents a lot of unique challenges to reporters, the weaponized lying, the gaslighting. It's a little bit different, or at least on a different level than other politicians we've encountered in modern American history. Not unique entirely, but I would say, on a different scale. And drawing from your background at the Post and some of the work that you do for Press Watch, I know this is a very broad question, but if you were back at an outlet like the Post, managing their political coverage heading into 2024, how would you approach covering Trump's campaign? What would be kind of the guardrails if you were trying to instruct reporters or kind of guide them to doing the type of coverage of a campaign like the one Trump is running that you think would be responsible and accountable? How would you oversee that?
It's a great question. I mean, the thing I would do first is say that this sort of knee-jerk desire to not take sides politically needs to be put aside here, because Trump is not just a political story. It's not just a question of what his politics are. The man is an extraordinary con man. He's everything that you write about Trump needs to be put in the context of that he is running a con on the American people, and that the media is enabling him if it just treats him more or less like a normal politician, or even if it, which it does nowadays, says this is a lie, this is not true, this is a conspiracy theory, but fundamentally still establishes him in this space as a reasonable political candidate, when what he is a con man. He's running a very elaborate con, and the more attention you give him without putting it in that context, the more you're enabling him.
Yeah, and I think related to this is one of the most recent posts on your site, where you were kind of taking aim at a fact check that the New York Times did about some of the comments Trump has made linking Alvin Bragg, the Manhattan DA, with George Soros. And obviously, as you get into in your piece, there is a high degree of anti-Semitism involved in some of these attacks on Bragg that people like Trump and other Republicans make. But I think this is kind of consistent with what you were just saying, that in doing kind of a serious fact check of these claims, and I don't have it right in front of me. I can't remember exactly what the headline of the Times's fact check was, but it was kind of indulging these claims that Trump was making as like a serious, political candidate, something that they would say. And almost by giving it that sort of treatment, instead of saying that, hey, this is a anti-Semitic dog whistle, and kind of dismissing it out of hand, by really, applying this sort of critical scrutiny that you would to, say something that Biden would say about a budget proposal. It's almost like a category error with Trump. And so, maybe that's a kind of a good, a good place to take this conversation is kind of your broader critique of fact checking, and particularly how that applies to Trump, because I do think that, when outlets like the Times or the Post, when they do these fact checks of some of the crazy stuff that Trump says, or in sometimes really, in some cases, very harmful and incendiary things that he says, just by applying that sort of scrutiny to his claims, it kind of validates him.
Right. Well, I have a real problem with fact checking, because I think it's completely anachronistic in our current age. And I think what's significant, yes, you need to call out the lies, absolutely. But what's even more significant right now is what I call the why behind the lie. I have a column I wrote called, the why behind the lie, and that's what matters. It's not just that he's lying; it's why is he lying, and why are they lying? And it's pretty obvious. I mean, any reporter knows why they're lying. They're lying because they're trying to create racial resentment and grievance, and try to distract from their own problems. And I mean, it's astonishing how much self-censorship goes on. And they produce these lame things like fact checks and articles where they mention that he said something that wasn't true, when what's at issue is the fundamental deceit, the goal of this person, which is to regain power and punish his enemies, make money, and divide the country. I mean, the divisions in this country are. I mean, I used to be optimistic, right, about where we were going.
Many of us were, yeah.
I mean, I'm an old guy now, but I grew up, back in that time when I felt like the arc, was going in the right way, and Trump has disrupted that in a way that's astonishing. And there's so much horrible, he's enabled all this kind of toxic garbage to spew into our national discourse, and I mean, none of that is reflected in how the press covers this. They feel they're very bold when they say that he'd lied about something, but fundamentally they treat this like normal politics. And part of it is because I think they want. It's not just they don't want to take sides; it's that they want there to be a contest, because then that's exciting to cover. Mm-hmm. They get more attention.
Did you think? maybe to back up a step here. So we remember in 2016, the first Trump campaign and some of the egregious press errors from that, such as, covering Trump's empty lectern instead of major speeches that Hillary Clinton was delivering, or, the obsessive coverage of her emails. I thought personally that some of the 2020 coverage, and, you have to paint with kind of a broad brush here, unless we're going to talk about specific stories, but I thought that in 2020, things got a little bit better where, especially when it came to Trump's lying about mail voting and his efforts to undermine elections even before January 6th. It felt like, elite outlets were pulling fewer punches and more willing to kind of call him out for that stuff. Was that kind of your sense as well, that there was some improvement from 2016 to 2020? And what are your expectations for 2024? I mean, do you think it's reasonable to hold, elite outlets to a little bit higher standard now that we have, ample experience of covering Trump? Or, maybe some of the coverage of the early stages of Trump's campaign is making you a little bit more pessimistic?
Yeah, all those things.
Yeah.
I mean, sure, the coverage of Trump got a lot more brutal and realistic as the facts emerged about what he was doing, and my God, he's led an insurrection. I mean, even the most affable "don't take sides" reporter has got to recognize that that's a little bit unusual. And so they didn't pull all their punches. How could they have? But they still pulled more than you'd think. And the coverage of the current race, I think shows all these signs of it. They are writing as if it's normal that Trump is the front runner, that this con man can be perpetuating this con. It's astonishing. And even more concerning to me is the coverage of Ron DeSantis, who, they're focusing now on whether he's or not he's a serious candidate, and I have no speculation about that. But the fact is, the man's record, it couldn't be clearer that he is a fascist, that he accumulates power and uses it to punish his enemies and to achieve his personal and political goals. I mean, this is the way that he has been taking on Disney, attacking Disney, that for the gall of saying that people should be allowed to say gay, and that he has tried to take over parts of the state government, and that he is censoring teachers and university professors. I mean, this is not normal, and yet the news organizations all write about him as sort of an interesting case study. Oh, look, there was this article in the Post yesterday about how he's accumulated power, and all of the obvious conclusions about him were relegated to critics say. Mm-hmm. And you could read the top 10 paragraphs and not realize the guy is a little caudillo. Mm-hmm. So I feel like a few little things changed, but the fundamental structure, which is that they were sort of enabling a lie, continues. And I'm deeply depressed. As far as what I expect, I don't expect any progress. I don't see any signs of it. The people who are in charge of the news organizations see no need to change course. I'd love to just ask them, do you really think you have helped create an informed American public? And if not, then what are you going to do about it? They just keep doing the same stuff over and over again.
Well, and I know that your work, and correct me if I'm wrong here, I mean, you focus a bit more on written media. I mean, it seems like a lot of your stuff takes aim at New York Times, Washington Post. One thing that I found to be disconcerting quite recently, although I understand why this happened, but the coverage of Trump's indictment and his arraignment, his processing in Manhattan, you probably, just following on Twitter, saw some of this where they had a helicopter that was following Trump's motorcade from Mar-a-Lago to the Palm Beach airport. And then they actually even had a camera on his flight as it took off and landed. And, his every movement from leaving Mar-a-Lago to arriving at Trump Tower was covered. And, the reality, whether we like it or not, is that Trump, at least for the cable networks, is ratings gold. I mean, we saw this during his presidency where it was all Trump all the time. And there was, very obvious incentives for that. And especially when you're talking about a network like CNN that is kind of starving for ratings at this point, where, they really have to be worried about that. It's like the first opportunity they had to kind of revert to all Trump all the time, they jumped on it. And, granted, it's unprecedented for a former president to be indicted. And so I get it to a point, but, if that's what we're in for, as the campaign heats up, I think there'll be a lot of similarities between 2024 and 2016.
Yeah, no, that was a very, very depressing sign of the media's continued, ability to be manipulated by Trump. On the other hand, though, at least it wasn't him talking the whole time, right?
Yeah.
So, but no, you're absolutely right. It exposed the dynamic that this guy is catnip, especially for cable news. And as you said, I mean, CNN's in a very interesting position. They're trying desperately to find some way to make themselves more attractive again, and I worry that they'll do more of this stuff. Yeah.
Why do you think it's tough for elite outlets like the Times and the Post to take more of the structural standpoint that you're alluding to, where, instead of covering the horse race, you kind of look at why, the two leading horses are DeSantis and Trump, and, kind of cover that as more of a problem, the problem that it is, rather than stripping that context? I mean, is it just as simple as not wanting to offend Republicans or conservative readers? What's your view on that?
I think, having worked, in and around newsrooms a lot of my life, I can tell you that the external pressures are not really the issue in most newsrooms. It's internal. It's all self-reinforcing, and it's also very, very defensive. And so, to answer your question, I think part of the reason they don't do that is because they'd have to admit that they haven't done it in the past, and that was a mistake. So they just keep doing what they've always been doing, because that's what that's the practice that they defend. And after Trump's election, there should have been an incredible come to Jesus moment in the news industry. So how did we allow this to happen? How did we fail? And it's not a question of politics. How did we allow misinformation and somebody who lies about everything to reach this kind of pinnacle? And obviously what we're doing isn't working. But they won't admit that. They won't admit that what they're doing isn't working. And so you have you passing on. There seemed like there were two potential opportunities when both the New York Times and the Washington Post replaced their editors over the last few years, but they've both been replaced with people who are still very much of the same cloth. And a newsroom works not because somebody is yelling at it from the outside, but because you do what your editor wants you to do. And so there's an incredible pressure within a newsroom to conform, and the stars are the ones who conform the best. So there's this very little appetite in a newsroom to do things differently. And even though there's a crying need for that.
Yeah. And kind of on this same topic, the lack of self-reflection that outlets can have. It was almost a year ago now that you wrote a piece that I came back across last night when I was prepping for this and kind of looking at some of the things that you've written about Biden coverage, about the negative framing that major outlets were doing on economic stories, and how this actually, it didn't just lead to readers being dour about the economy. It actually led to them being misinformed, where I believe there, was polling research that was done asking people, basically things like, pertaining to the unemployment rate, pertaining to inflation. And when people were asked, to kind of identify basic facts about the macroeconomy, they were getting that wrong. And, the point of your column was that there should be some self-reflection from journalists about why people are misinformed, and some correction, rather than, kind of covering people's misperceptions as a news story unto itself, and sort of absolving themselves from any blame in the fact that, people seem to be getting facts about the economy wrong. So, it's been about a year. There was a lot, just me running a newsletter and interacting with a lot of readers. There was a lot of frustration of the coverage of Biden as it pertained to like the Afghanistan withdrawal and as it pertained to inflation. I've noticed a little bit less of that recently, and I'm not sure, Biden has been keeping a little bit lower profile, it seems like, the last, couple months, as the news cycle has been consumed by Trump stuff again, with his indictment, with the horse race of 2024. But, I guess just big picture, how do you think coverage of Biden has gone? Biden being a very normal president coming on the heels of an extremely abnormal one. And, I think there have been temptations that elite outlets and reporters have fallen into to kind of equivocate between Trump and Biden, or to absolve Trump of blame for problems that he played a large role in creating that Biden is trying to deal with. But, what's your view on that? Do you think that the coverage of Biden has broadly fallen short? Has it improved? What are your thoughts?
Well, I think the obvious issue was that, again, the internal pressure in newsrooms was to find fault with Biden so that they wouldn't look like they were cheerleading for him. And so they have. And it also dovetails with certain other sort of newsroom, truths. The mythology that deficits are a problem, that only that serious people want to attack the deficit, and so on. So what you have is a situation where anything they can blame Biden for, they do. And so, yes, the coverage of the economy is kind of amazing, and it's always interesting to watch how different outfits cover certain news releases. When the jobs numbers come in. Is it good news? Is it bad news? It's almost always bad news for Biden.
Yeah.
Lately, the news has been so good that they've been having a harder time doing that.
Even when it's good, sometimes it's bad, because then the market doesn't like it because it suggests that inflation might continue. Anyway, yeah.
Right. Exactly. If job numbers are good, then we're heading into an inflationary cycle, and if they're bad, then we're already in a recession. It's just. Yeah. And inflation is always a problem. So it's interesting. Just in the last few weeks, I've seen a little bit less of that, a little bit more coverage acknowledging that the Biden economy is actually doing astonishingly well. Even The Economist had a big piece the other day about how the Biden economy is doing astonishingly well, and America is doing extremely well. That is not, however, the dominant narrative still and yet. And on Afghanistan, yeah, I mean. The reality is, getting out of Afghanistan was never going to be easy, and it was something that had to be done. And but reporters saw this as an occasion to jump on Biden and all of a sudden say, well, he's now a loser.
Yeah, and that kind of coincided. I mean, it's a little bit of a chicken and egg, but late 2021 was when his approval ratings really started to slide.
Oh yeah.
And there was a very controversial piece in the Washington Post, I think, by Dana Milbank, I believe his last name is pronounced, where he presented some research with data, that negative framing of stories was impacting Biden's approval rating. And I did see some controversy as to how authoritative his actual research was on that. But that did, regardless of the causality, the Afghanistan withdrawal and some of the coverage surrounding that did coincide. And there was inflation too, but with Biden's approval ratings really tanking in late 2021. And, that had impacts in the 2022 midterms as well. I also want to talk a little bit about, we talked with you for the newsletter in December, just before, obviously, the new Congress began. And I just want to read a couple sentences. I thought this, was kind of a prescient comment that you made, and I want to kind of circle back to see how you think things are going. But you said, on the topic of the new Republican House, quote, "The other thing I'm worried about is that the press will go back to just treating politics like a fight between two parties, both of which have a reasonably similar connection to reality and plausible hopes to run the country. They have not pointed out that the Republican Party has no agenda at this point, but to obstruct the government and flood the zone with shit. To the extent that they have an agenda, it's possibly to hold the global economy hostage to force Biden to take money away from seniors and poor people, which is basically a way of reducing the burden of taxes on the rich," end quote. So, here we are, 4 months later. How do you think coverage of this Republican House is going?
Well, I think it's been absolutely disastrous when it comes to the debt ceiling. That's for sure. I mean, the media has completely bought into this notion that there is, an actual debate to be had right now over which direction, what the fiscal direction of the country is. when the debt ceiling is a completely normal thing to increase when anybody who's interested in governing is in power. What the Republicans have done is they've completely weaponized this really stupid technical little thing, and are basically planning to hold everything hostage for a bunch of demands they can't even agree on what the hell they should be. And the press is taking this so seriously. They're being so, there's a story in the New York Times, I think it was the other day, basically saying, oh, this sets up a terrible fiscal debate, just as the presidential election is heating up. Like, okay, this is complete baloney. This is a Republican stunt. And so far, at least, the Democrats in the White House have been adamant, saying we're not going to negotiate. But for months, you've been reading about, the negotiations are coming up, and having an ongoing Twitter spat with Michael Shear at the Washington Post, where he wrote, McCarthy and Biden are getting ready to negotiate. I'm like, the hell they are.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, they negotiate like a hostage taker would negotiate with police or something like that, and I think that speaks to
Democrats for good reason are saying this is not an appropriate time to talk about this stuff. Let's talk about the budget, but it's a clown show. It's a clown show, with hostages, and the way that the press coverage has been, both sided on this is absolutely depressing as hell to me.
Yeah, and I think it speaks to the point we've circled back to a few times, which is that, it's important for journalists to kind of zoom out and look at why things are happening, not just that they're happening or, conveying what's happening. It's also, why is this happening? And there's really no reason with the debt ceiling, there's no reason for the hostage taking. It's as irrational as any other form of hostage taking. And it'd be nice if, that was called out a little bit more often, but, then
that's it's not, I don't think the reporters are being evil. Think about the incentive structures. I mean, it's a lot easier to write about what happened yesterday than it is to write about what happened yesterday in context. Mm-hmm. And you're much less likely to get in trouble with your editors. And, and you're much less likely to get in trouble with your sources. So the end result is this piece that basically fails to inform the public and what's really going on, but meets the needs of the newsroom.
Yep. Well, we've done a lot of criticism. I thought it'd be constructive to end on a more constructive note, to use that word twice in one sentence. Are there any outlets or specific journalists out there that you think are doing really good work? I mean, obviously you do really good work in the area of criticism, but in terms of actually reporting the news, if listeners or viewers of this want to, have some recommendations in terms of where they can go, where would you send them?
Well, first of all, I mean, part of the reason I concentrate so much on the Washington Post and the New York Times is not just because of their influence, but because they also are great newspapers. Mm. It's tough love. And the fact is that even as they do possibly the worst political coverage, of all time, they're also probably doing the best investigative coverage of all time. I mean, their investigative staffs are fantastic. And, I can't imagine what it must be like for them to have to read the crap that their the star political reporters are pushing out every day, but they do great work. And so, on any number of issues, the huge series the New York Times just did on migrant children labor. I mean, there's terrific investigative work being done by all the major news organizations that I criticize for bad political coverage. Other than that, though, I mean, the internet is a wild and beautiful place. I mean, I survive in part by not just looking at the usual sources, but I use Twitter to sort of see what my people I like are reading, or people I don't like are reading. I mean, I think Mother Jones has certainly come out of this looking very validated and very strong. I've, the Nation in media criticism, CJR does some very good stuff as well as some very bad stuff. I mean, but I mean, there is great journalism out there, and just like at the local level where local newspapers are being so devastated, there are still great local journalism being done when it can. So, I mean, I still think it's a great profession. I find that the political reporting is a uniquely bleak spot.
Yeah. And just to circle back, maybe a closing question here. in your experience when you were at the Post, and you've like you said, you've been in and around newsrooms most of your career. Do you think that there was something specifically about Trump that kind of made political journalism so dicey, or introduced a lot of these challenges that we've been talking about with framing and just how to present stories? Or did you notice these things? Maybe we could obviously go back to WMD and the coverage of the Iraq War, the run up to it. I mean, there are obviously a lot of problems with that too. Maybe I'm kind of answering my own question, that these are more, kind of deep seated issues than ones that are kind of a creation of this Trump era that we're in right now.
Right. Well, and both can be true. I mean, the reality is that the Republican Party basically went off the rails when McCain picked Sarah Palin, and the press has sort of averted its eyes from this lunacy ever since then. And obviously was very susceptible to authoritarian drum beating by the George W. Bush administration. So yeah, I mean, the press has always had problems. I think Trump added to this phenomenon in two ways. One, nobody's ever lied as much as he has about everything. I mean, and the other is he's just amazing. He's an amazing figure, born of reality TV. You can't take your eyes off of him. If you're a news guy, you're just going like, "Oh my God, I can't believe he just said." And so he basically, realized that he could completely outplay them, and he did. But they were already, very bad at the game.
Yeah, well, and we have 18 more months at least of Trump coverage to look forward to, and then after he loses to Biden again, maybe he'll be the Republican nominee in 2028 for a fourth run. So lots of fun things to look forward to. And if you want to follow along with all of Dan's insights about how things are going well and mostly not going well, be sure to check out Press Watch. Anything else you want to plug? Your Twitter handle? Before we log off here.
Well, Press Watch is at presswatchers.org. And yeah, I still tweet too much. So come see me at Froomkin.
Where are you going, as Twitter kind of circles the drain here? Are you on any of the other platforms, Mastodon, Truth Social?
I've tried Mastodon and Post and so on. I don't know. It's been really bad. I mean, and the ability to, Twitter was great for independent journalists to get attention, because they don't have the bandwidth of the pipe of the Washington Post, the New York Times, whatever, and it's suffered tremendously. And traffic has gone way down, and I can see my tweets are not reverberating like they used to. So there's no substitute so far.
Yeah, the one thing I will say on that note, and maybe this is kind of inside baseball for listeners, but I have noticed that Substack Notes is really good for promoting published work. I know that you're not on Substack, you have kind of your own site, but I would just kind of toss that out there, where I've noticed that when I post my newsletters on Substack Notes, they get pretty good engagement, a lot of shares on there. So that's at least one platform where I've had friends who are not writers ask me if they should get on there, and I kind of tell them, I don't think it's necessary unless you're looking to promote your own content. But for someone like you, it could be a good place to at least start cross-promoting your work a little bit and getting it in front of the eyeballs there, because it's a pretty engaged audience, people who read a lot of stuff like my newsletter and your website. So that's one kind of parting tip here from me.
Thanks. Well, call me later and explain to me how to do that then.
Okay. Well, thanks a lot for your time today, Dan. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Aaron.
That does it for today's episode of the Aaron Rupar Show. Please subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts, and also follow me on YouTube to watch the footage of the show each week. You can find me there at the Aaron Rupar Show. New episodes drop every Wednesday, so be sure to check out your feeds each week for a new installment of the show, and thanks for listening.